Eleanor Brooks, a 58-year-old woman living quietly in Louisville, Kentucky, had devoted her youth to raising her only son, Michael, after her husband's untimely death. For 3 decades, she had scrimped and saved every penny, night after night, clinging to the hope that her son would one day have a better life than her own. But when Michael moved to Seattle and started his own family, the distance between mother and son grew increasingly vast. Phone calls became less frequent, conversations turned rushed, and every time Eleanor tried to bridge the gap, Michael would withdraw as if she were a part of his past he preferred to forget. One morning, while brewing coffee, Eleanor accidentally stumbled upon a baby gender reveal video posted on the social media account of Nora, Michael's wife. What stunned her into silence wasn't the joyful news itself, but the scene of Nora's entire family embracing and celebrating together, while the baby's paternal grandmother wasn't even mentioned. No one had sent her a private message. No one had called to share the news. The mother who had single-handedly raised her son for 30 years realized she was gradually being pushed to the periphery of her own son's life. Eleanor tried to remain calm. She told herself that perhaps Michael was busy, perhaps it wasn't intentional on Nora's part, but deep down, she knew something was wrong. Her congratulatory calls were met with polite but distant refusals. Every response from Michael was brief, guarded, and always accompanied by Nora's whispers in the background, as though someone else was dictating what he was allowed to say. Eleanor felt it clearly. She wasn't just being forgotten. She was being systematically excluded from the very family she had sacrificed her entire life to build. After seeing the baby gender reveal video, Eleanor tried to keep things light. She called to offer her congratulations, hoping simply to hear her son's voice and share in the joy of becoming a grandmother. But from the moment Michael answered the phone, Eleanor sensed something was off. His voice was hesitant, faltering, as if this call was the last thing he wanted. He spoke in vague generalities, avoiding any real conversation. And before Eleanor could say much more, she faintly heard Nora whispering in the background. Immediately, Michael's demeanor shifted entirely. He became cold, guarded, and ended the call abruptly, as if afraid that just a few more seconds would plunge him into an uncomfortable situation he wasn't prepared to handle. A wave of disappointment washed over her, but Eleanor didn't blame him. She simply sat in silence, wondering what had made her son grow so distant. Over the years, she had known Michael to be somewhat sensitive about their humble origins and their difficult past, but she never imagined he would be so apprehensive that he'd keep his distance even during a moment as sacred as this. The sudden shift in his tone, Nora's mysterious whispers, the way he stiffened, it all felt like a tightening rope, pulling Eleanor toward a truth she didn't want to face. Something within her son's family was quietly, deliberately pushing her away, gently but firmly, like a door closing before she could understand why. And from that moment on, a deep unease began to stir within Eleanor, a gut feeling that the mother-son bond she had spent her life nurturing was being twisted into something she no longer recognized. After that distant phone call, Eleanor tried her best to remain calm. She told herself that Michael was probably just tired, that young people sometimes weren't as expressive as her generation. She comforted herself with gentle excuses, hoping it was all just a temporary misunderstanding. But that hope quickly crumbled when Eleanor decided to prepare a small gift for her unborn grandchild, a hand-knitted baby blanket, the same kind she had spent months making for Michael when he was an infant. To Eleanor, it wasn't just a gift. It was a piece of her love and memories, her way of welcoming a new life into the world. When she contacted Nora to ask for the address to send the gift, the response she received left her speechless. Nora replied curtly, almost coldly, saying they didn't accept handmade items because they didn't match the baby's aesthetic, and suggested Eleanor send a gift card instead if she wanted to contribute anything at all. With just a simple message, her heartfelt gift was reduced to something cheap and unworthy of even being in their home. Eleanor stood frozen, feeling as though a door had been slammed in her face without explanation. Trying to swallow her sadness, she told herself that Nora might just be busy or under stress from the pregnancy. But a few weeks later, a neighbor of Eleanor's, an avid social media user, brought her news that left her heartbroken. Nora's family had just thrown an extravagant baby shower. Everything from the cake and gifts to the decorations was filmed and live-streamed as if it were a major event. The neighbor, unaware of the pain she was causing, showed Eleanor the video on her phone. Eleanor stared intently at the screen, searching for any mention of herself. But all she saw were the joyful faces of Nora's family. Nora's mother, sisters, relatives, and friends all hugging and laughing as if this were the celebration of the year. When someone in the live stream joked that the baby will definitely be surrounded by the most amazing grandmothers, everyone clapped, and Nora's mother stood proudly in the center as if she were the only one with any claim to the child. No one asked about the paternal grandmother. No one mentioned Eleanor's name. She was completely invisible. Watching the glittering lights on the screen, Eleanor felt herself being erased from her son's family portrait. No one said it outright, but every action, every choice, every gaze in those videos carried the same message. You don't belong here. She began to realize that the initial distance wasn't accidental. It was a series of small, deliberate steps, subtle yet unmistakable, meant to push her out of Michael's life without her even realizing it. And for the first time in years, Eleanor felt afraid, a fear that this time a mother's love might not be enough to keep her son by her side. After being repeatedly sidelined, Eleanor still clung to the small hope that a face-to-face meeting would clear up all misunderstandings. She believed that if she could just look into her son's eyes, if they could have a heartfelt conversation, Michael would remember all those years they had relied on each other. So, when Michael agreed to let her come to Seattle for a quick meal before the baby's birth, Eleanor saw it as an opportunity to mend their relationship. She spent the whole week preparing, choosing her neatest outfit, wrapping a small gift, and setting off with the heart of a mother who only wanted to see her son happy. But the moment Eleanor stepped into the restaurant Nora had chosen, she knew this meeting was nothing like what she had imagined. It was so upscale that she felt out of place. Everything, from the lighting and music to the way people were dressed, sent a silent message: this was not her world. When Nora appeared with Michael, that feeling grew even stronger. Nora was polite, but it was a politeness designed to maintain distance, not to connect. Her every word was light as a feather, yet carried the weight of an invisible boundary. When Eleanor tried to ask about Nora's health or the birth clan, she would give vague, almost rehearsed answers before quickly changing the subject to something distant and evasive. Nora's family, who happened to be at the restaurant, didn't hesitate to show their attitude either. They looked Eleanor over with judgmental eyes, as if observing someone who had wandered into the wrong place. They spoke to each other in rapid sentences filled with slang Eleanor didn't understand. occasionally glancing at her and chuckling softly. No one said anything outright, but she felt their condescension. Michael, as had become his habit lately, remained almost silent. He avoided making eye contact with his mother, focusing instead on his phone or fussing excessively over Nora. Seeing this hurt Eleanor more than any harsh words could have. She had hoped that in person he would break through that wall of distance, but instead Michael retreated into silence as if hiding something. Then came the moment Eleanor would never forget, just as the meeting was about to end. While the two parties were momentarily a few steps apart, Nora approached Eleanor, her expression calm, but her eyes icy cold. The words she spoke made the air around Eleanor freeze silent. It wasn't shyness, nor was it mere dislike. It was an outright rejection, a firm barrier declaring that Eleanor was not welcome in the life of the unborn child. When the meeting ended, Eleanor left the restaurant, feeling as though she had been pushed out of Michael's world in the cruelest way possible. Not with loud insults, just a series of small, polite, subtle gestures perfectly designed to make her understand that she did not belong there. And on her way back, for the first time, Eleanor felt with absolute clarity that the distance between them was no accident. It was orchestrated. It was intentional. And it originated from the very family her son was building, a family that did not want her presence in any part of their future. Time passed, and the signs of being shut out of Michael's life grew clearer. But Eleanor still clung to the fragile hope that when the baby was born, everything would change. She believed that sacred moment would reawaken the instinct to love in her son's heart, that Michael would remember who had raised him from his very first days. But the reality was far more brutal. One foggy morning, as Eleanor was watering the flower pots on her porch, her phone vibrated. She thought it was the big news call, the moment she had been waiting for her whole life. But what she received was only a brief text from Michael, just a few words announcing the baby's birth and that everyone was fine. No further details, no invitation, no indication that Eleanor was expected. The message was so terse it was no different from a generic announcement sent to a casual acquaintance. Feeling as if her heart were being squeezed, Eleanor hurriedly packed her bags and boarded a nearly 2,000-mile bus journey to Seattle. For 2 days straight, sitting on a hard seat amid the rumbling engine and the cold air seeping through the windows, she thought of only one thing: holding her grandchild for the first time, seeing Michael in the moment he became a father. She imagined herself walking into the room, seeing her son smile and introduce the baby with pride. Those imaginings were the only thing that kept her sane throughout the exhausting journey. But when Eleanor arrived at the hospital, all that hope vanished in an instant. Right at the entrance to the maternity ward, security stopped her. They said her name wasn't on the approved visitor list, that Nora had requested restricted visitation, that only Nora's family and close friends were allowed in the room. Eleanor tried to explain that she was Michael's birth mother, the baby's grandmother, but the security guard's eyes reflected only pity, not understanding. From a distance, Eleanor saw Michael standing near the hospital room. He glanced at her briefly, but his gaze was that of someone trapped rather than joyful. He didn't come closer, he didn't say a word, he didn't open the closed door. He just looked and then turned away, as if her presence there might cause him trouble. And what hurt Eleanor the most was the sight of Nora's mother holding the baby first, the grandchild she had traveled thousands of miles to meet, the baby she had imagined and waited for all those months. Everyone around was beaming, congratulating, leaning in to look at the child with loving eyes, while Eleanor stood outside, like a stranger with no connection to that world. No one invited her in. No one asked why she was standing there. No one wondered why Michael's mother was left alone in the cold hallway. And in that moment, Eleanor understood. This was a decision,
A boundary had been clearly drawn. Her son's family had defined her as no longer belonging to them. After being turned away at the hospital and witnessing firsthand how she was being shut out of her grandchild's life, Eleanor left with a heavy heart. Yet, a stubborn belief persisted within her that Michael was merely being controlled by Nora. She told herself that her son was gentle and easily influenced, and that these cruel decisions must have originated from Nora. She believed that if Michael would only reflect on the situation, he would see the pain he had unintentionally caused. But the next day, Eleanor heard something that shattered her heart into 100 pieces. While waiting for the bus to leave Seattle, she met a young nurse who had just finished her shift, one who had seen Eleanor standing outside the delivery room that day. When the nurse learned that Michael was Eleanor's birth mother, she grew flustered, hesitated, and then revealed something Eleanor had never imagined. Before the delivery, Nora had told the medical team that Michael had a mother who was psychologically unstable, that she had hurt Michael in the past, and that they wanted to restrict all contact to avoid stressing the new mother. Eleanor was stunned, but the most painful part wasn't that Nora had said those things. It was that Michael himself had signed the family information forms, confirming all of it as truth. He had done so proactively, without any coercion. In those documents, the section about his birth mother was replaced with fabricated claims so cold that Eleanor felt her legs could no longer support her. She couldn't understand why her son would construct such a story. Then, fragmented memories began piecing themselves together. Michael had always been sensitive about their humble origins since he was a child. As he grew older, he tried to hide the years spent in a tiny house, the second-hand clothes she had gotten from church donations, or the simple dinner she cooked to save money for her husband's medicine. Eleanor had thought her son simply wanted a better future, but she never imagined he would be so ashamed of his past that he wanted to erase it entirely, including the mother who had struggled to raise him. In a moment of painful clarity, Eleanor realized the truth she had never considered. Nora wasn't the sole architect of this boundary. Michael wasn't being manipulated. He was complicit. He wanted to build a perfect image in front of his wife's wealthy family. He wanted Nora to believe he came from a proper, tidy background, unburdened by any complications. And to achieve that, he had chosen to remove his mother from the picture. He had been lying about her for years, and Nora was simply acting on what she believed to be true. Understanding this, Eleanor no longer felt she was being pushed out accidentally. She realized clearly that it was her son, driven by shame and ambition, who had actively chosen to exclude her from his life. In that moment, Eleanor knew the pain she was enduring didn't just come from a cold daughter-in-law. It came from the son she had loved with all her heart. The nurse's words that day struck Eleanor like a physical blow, revealing a darkness she never knew existed. For days afterward, she sank into a gloomy silence where memories, pain, and disbelief intertwined into a suffocating tangle. She returned to Kentucky feeling as though she had lost the most important thing in her life, yet still unable to fully grasp the severity of what she was facing. Then, a week later, everything shattered in a way no one could have anticipated. A letter arrived from the Seattle hospital notifying her of an update to the emergency contact information. A letter mistakenly sent to Eleanor's address because the system hadn't been fully updated. She opened it out of curiosity, but within seconds her hands trembled uncontrollably. In that document, The section related to the mother's family had been completely altered. According to the information Michael provided, the person listed as his birth mother had passed away years ago. The name Eleanor Brooks was crossed out. The word deceased was written coldly in the space where her name once belonged. In that moment, Eleanor felt as though her entire life had been thrown into an abyss. All those years of working late into the night, juggling 2 or 3 jobs at once, the simple dinners she scrimped on to save money for her son, the time she mended Michael's clothes so he wouldn't be teased by his friends, the nights she sat by the window, worried sick when he had a high fever. All those sacrifices had now been reduced to a piece of paper confirming that she had never existed as his mother. What was even more terrifying was that Michael had done this completely deliberately. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision under pressure. It was a calculated choice. A choice meant to erase every trace of her from his life to fit the image he wanted to build in his new family. In that moment, something inside Eleanor shattered. She stood silently for a long time in her small kitchen, the very place that had once echoed with the laughter of mother and son during their impoverished years, the place where she had struggled to create a home despite all the hardships. She realized that all this time she had clung to a futile hope, the hope that Michael was merely being influenced by someone else, that her son still loved her deep down. But the stark truth in that letter spoke for itself. Michael hadn't just created distance, he had officially erased her existence. The feeling wasn't like anger, nor was it like despair. It was more like a petrification, a silent, cold kind of pain that left Eleanor with no strength to hold on to hope any longer. In that moment, she understood that she had lost her only son. Her son had chosen to abandon her.
After reading the letter confirming that her son had declared her deceased, Eleanor could no longer cry. Her tears seemed to have dried up after so many disappointments. So many times she had been disregarded, pushed away from moments any mother deserved to be part of. She stood motionless for a long time in the small house that had once held the warm memories of her and her son, but now every corner of the home became a painful reminder that the mother-son bond she had cherished for decades had been callously erased by Michael himself. Eleanor didn't call Michael. She didn't text, didn't demand an explanation, didn't ask for reasons. Deep down, she understood that no explanation could ever bridge the chasm that had just been created. She knew she had to break free from this painful cycle, a cycle where every hope ended in a deeper wound. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt clearly that her love for her son was no longer an anchor. It had become a chain that was draining her. And so, very quietly, Eleanor decided to leave Kentucky. She began packing her belongings with the slow deliberation of someone carefully dismantling pieces of a memory she could not take with her. Photos of Michael as a child were placed in a separate box. Old clothes, keepsakes from their life together. She arranged them all meticulously, as if she were packing away her own life to step into a new chapter with no room for pain. Eleanor didn't tell her neighbors. She didn't mention it to the people she used to chat with every morning. She quietly sold her old car, liquidated some furniture, and transferred the deed of the house to a private fund she had set up years earlier. Everything was done neatly and orderly, just as she had always lived her life. In her final days before leaving, Eleanor stood by the window looking out at the small street in front of her house. That was where Michael had taken his first steps, learned to ride a bike,
and later left to start his new life. She had once thought her son would return to her one day when he was mature enough to understand that no one would ever love him like his mother, but now she knew. Some people only look forward, leaving behind everything that no longer fits the image they want to build. On the morning Eleanor departed, her neighbors only saw a small moving truck parked in front of her house before it disappeared from the familiar street. No one knew where she was going. No one was notified. Eleanor left in absolute silence, the silence of someone who had endured enough and chosen to set herself free. Michael remained unaware. In the days after Eleanor vanished, his phone remained as silent as ever because he had never been the one to call. He didn't know that the last time his mother thought of him was the moment she fully understood that she had been erased from her son's life and decided to learn how to do the same.
2 months after Eleanor disappeared from her son's life, Michael and Nora's lives continued on their perfectly normal trajectory. They were busy with picture-perfect family photo shoots, updates about their luxurious lifestyle, and plans for their child's bright future. To them, Eleanor's silence was simply an unnoticed void. Michael didn't think about his mother, and Nora never mentioned the woman she believed was troubled, though she never truly understood why. But then, on a late autumn afternoon, Michael received a call from a law firm in Louisville. At first, he thought it was a mistake, but when he heard his name clearly mentioned, a vague sense of unease settled in. He opened the letter that arrived the same day, a thick envelope from that firm, and as he read the first line, his entire body went cold. From the enclosed documents, he learned that Eleanor had officially transferred all of her assets to a sole heir. It wasn't him, nor was it his son, but a child with no blood relation, a little girl named Madison, whom Eleanor had legally adopted just weeks after leaving Kentucky. Not only had she adopted her, but she had also established a substantial trust fund for the child, covering all living expenses, education, and future needs until she turned 21. Michael flipped through the pages, disoriented. He never knew his mother had such significant assets. In his mind, Eleanor was just a poor woman living in an old house. But the numbers before him told a different story. The life insurance policy her late husband had left, the retirement savings accumulated over decades, and the wooded land spanning over 12 acres that had been passed down from her husband's family. All of it, nearly $500,000, now belonged to a complete stranger. It was then that Michael realized he had never asked his mother about her life. He had no idea how she had struggled, nor did he know what she had quietly been preparing for the future. He had never paid attention to the increasing wrinkles on her face, or the time she had laughed things off to hide her heartache. He had only cared about building a perfect image for his wife's family, even if it meant erasing the woman who had raised him. The more he read, the more he felt the blood drain from his body. A small letter tucked among the documents made Michael's heart feel as if it were being squeezed. It was Eleanor's final message to him, brief but enough to shatter the world he had tried so hard to build. In that letter, she did not accuse, blame, or express anger. There was only the serenity of someone who had finally understood her own worth and chose to give her love to a place that truly valued it. When he reached the final line, Michael knew this loss was not a punishment from Eleanor. It was the natural consequence of the choices he himself had made. And for the first time in his life, he felt the full weight of the emptiness that comes with losing someone he had always assumed would be there forever.
As Eleanor's final letter fell onto the table, Michael sat in silence for a long time, as if the entire world had just slipped through his fingers. He stared into the empty space before him, searching for something to hold on to, an explanation, a hope, anything that could prove it wasn't too late. But the more he thought, the clearer the brutal truth became. The mother he had tried to erase from his life was now truly gone. In the days that followed, Michael felt an absence for the first time, one he had never imagined would affect him. He went to Eleanor's old house with the fragile hope that it was all just a misunderstanding. But the door was locked, the windows were dusty, and the porch that once felt warm now echoed with emptiness. The neighbors said Eleanor had left quietly. No one knew where she had gone. All her belongings had been cleared out, as if she had never lived there at all. Michael walked through the empty house with a choking feeling he had nechair known before. Every corner, every wall, every trace left behind reminded him of his childhood years, the simple but warm dinners, the rushed breakfasts his mother always prepared, the winter evenings she sat beside him as he did his homework. All of it had once been the foundation of his life, yet he had so easily denied it just to gain acceptance from a wealthy family. In the small room where Eleanor used to knit blankets, Michael found the only envelope she had left for him. It contained no accusations, no questions about why, no cries for help or demands for redemption, just a few short lines, carrying a gentleness that only a mother who had endured profound pain could express. The words were not heavy or sharp, yet each sentence felt like a thin blade cutting through the prideful shell Michael had built around himself. In that moment, Michael understood something he had never realized before. The most sacred bond, a mother's love, needs to be nurtured, cherished, and preserved with sincerity. And sometimes, when that love is betrayed too many times, the one who gives it learns to walk away, seeking a place where it is truly valued. Michael left the old house in heavy silence. For the first time, he felt the enormity of his loss, and he understood that what had happened was not his mother's punishment, but a lesson life had sent him, a lesson about indifference, about wrong choices, and about the cost of losing someone who truly loved him. Somewhere else, in a peaceful countryside far from all the noise, Eleanor held little Madison's hand, walking along a dirt path under the soft afternoon light. There she smiled peacefully, having found where she belonged, a place where love was received and cherished.